And welcome back to the Getting to Know Greenville podcast. I'm Katherine, and today I'm joined by the wonderful Mr. Matt Giles, who is the artistic director of the South Carolina Children's Theater. I'm super excited to talk to you today. Of course, as a person who is biased and loves doing work here, I'm excited to talk about the mission and expose people to more of what you guys are about. So my first question is, if for people who don't know, can you just explain what the mission of South Carolina Children's Theater is, maybe the function of the organization, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so our mission, we say that we are here to educate and stimulate the minds and imaginations of young people and their families. And we do that through three ways: through our onstage productions and performances, which happen here in this space. And also we have a black box second stage as well. We have year-round educational classes in our theater arts conservatory, teaching everything from creative imagination, creative drama, to advanced level acting skills. And then the third way we do all those things is through our outreach program. We go into schools and child development centers, partner with places like Camp Courage, Boys and Girls Clubs, to make theater accessible to as wide an audience and as many young people as we possibly can. So that's sort of our goal, is to change the lives of young people and their families through the transformational power of theater. As cheesy as it sounds, that's what we do.
No, but I love it, and I think, you do definitely accomplish that mission.
I hope so.
One of the things that I think is a common misconception about the children's theater that is so funny is when I tell my friends that I do it, they're like, but don't they just cast children? And they think that I'm like a weirdo for doing it, and then I have to explain that they do, in fact, cast age appropriately for the most part.
That's true. Well, yeah, it's there are moments when obviously it is helpful to have young people on the stage telling the story, and especially depending on the needs and demands of the cast. But there are other times when it's helpful for the young people in the audience to get to see seasoned performers telling stories. And so we cast both young people and adults. We try and cast, like you said, age appropriately. There are shows we'll do with more young people, just if the story calls for it, if we think the production is better for it. And there are shows that we will do with primarily adults if we think that story calls for that. It just depends on the play, it depends on the production and the story we're trying to tell.
Yeah. I was going to ask next, what I often ask people if they have always been in Greenville. If so, why did they choose to stay? I know that you haven't, that you're from the area, but that you moved around a lot, had different jobs in other very impressive theaters as well. So I wanted to kind of have you talk a little bit about that, and then what led you from those jobs back to SCCT.
I'm from Spartanburg, the northern end of Spartanburg County. I grew up on Lake Bowen and went to Wofford College, and then started doing plays here at the Children's Theater in 2007, right after I graduated from college. And started here as an actor, and then as a teaching artist, and then as a director. And then in 2011, I moved away. I moved to Seattle to work full-time at Seattle Repertory Theater. I was the associate producing director there for about 7 years. Had a great time, loved it, love Seattle, miss Seattle to this day. Even the rain, it's not as rainy as everybody says it is. That's a lie. Just gray a lot, but except the summers, which are gorgeous. But so I was in Seattle for 7 years. I got to work on some phenomenal productions at the Rep. We were where Come From Away started before it went to Broadway. A few other massive fun projects.
I also read that in your bio, and I was absolutely shook by that fact.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. That was a cool project to work on. It was a cool project to be. I was in the room for the first professional workshop, and helped produce the first professional workshop, which was vibrant and exciting to be in the room, and you knew as soon as they started rehearsing that was going to be something special.
Mm-hmm.
And then a few other things. Worked with David Byrne of the Talking Heads on his production of a musical called Here Lies Love. And then left Seattle, and then of course directed elsewhere in Seattle at Seattle Children's Theater and a few other places. And then in 2018, I left Seattle to move to Minneapolis to work at Children's Theater Company, which is the largest children's theater in the nation. Some would say the world. They would say the world. And I was only there for about 13, 14 months. Because right after I moved to Minneapolis, Debbie Bell, who is our retiring executive director here at South Carolina Children's Theater. Debbie and I have known each other, obviously, since 2007. Debbie called me on the phone and began some conversations about, would you be interested in potentially coming back and taking over artistic leadership of the theater? And those conversations lasted for a while. It took a little bit of time for me to be convinced. My career was on a sort of trajectory in these large cities, larger markets, larger organizations. But I've always loved Greenville. I've always loved the South. My family is still here. And I think coming back for me was about, I do theater because I believe, as I sort of said at the outset, right, that it has the power to change people and to change lives. And not just through political statements. I don't mean in that way. Just the coming together and the communal art of storytelling together, I think is life changing and can be life changing. And so the idea of coming back to a community that I love, that I believe in, and working to make a difference here was ultimately too good an opportunity to pass up. And so that's what led me back to Greenville. Was this organization, and of course getting to be closer to family, getting out of the wicked, bitter cold of Minneapolis, which is awful.
Yeah.
But also getting to come back and make art in a theater, in a community that I'm passionate about.
I think that's something that's a very unique thing, because I feel like a lot of theater artists and artists in general always imagine that they're going to go to a big city and then stay for a long time. And, the dreams are like Chicago, New York, Boston, whatever, those kinds of cities. And even for me, that was kind of the dream for a while. And I think a lot of people are surprised when people who have those artistic dreams decide to come back to somewhere that seems smaller, but to me has just as rich of an artistic community as some of those bigger places. Well, of course, it's different and it's smaller, sure, but I think that the impact can be... I mean, we've even talked about this before in terms of, like, not to get political, but it's just in a small way, how local politics are just as important as, like, big things. And I think in the arts, it's the same thing. Local arts are just as important as the big cities and Broadway and all that.
That's right. I mean, not everybody can get to Broadway, and not everybody can get to Chicago. The two greatest the greatest theater towns or cities in the country are Chicago and New York, and not everybody can get there. But that doesn't mean that people don't deserve access to both being able to participate in the creation of great art and interesting and exciting art, and also participate and experience the creation of great art and exciting art. And so, I agree with you. I think it's a lot of the reason, as you said, there's a question of impact, and a lot of the reason I think anybody stays in a smaller community or a relatively smaller community is because you want to have impact, and if that's a goal, if that's a thing that drives you, that gets you out of bed in the morning, is to try and impact your community positively. It's easier sometimes to have that impact, and sometimes it is more profound of an impact in a smaller environment. I mean, I could have worked 20, 30 years in Seattle and maybe only had a small portion of the impact I feel like I can have more directly here in a spot like Greenville.
Well, and on top of that, I was listening to a podcast this morning, and they were talking about Broadway and theater in general, and how Broadway in particular is kind of like, it can be a kind of a classist art form out of necessity, but it's hard because, it's not like, theater is not seen as an accessible art form. Not a lot of people do go to it, especially if they're not near it. And so for me, I feel like organizations like the Children's Theater, which provide really professionally done theater for, not an insane ticket price, is one of the most important things in the arts, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
So kind of segueing, sure. Not in a super smooth way, but I was going to ask you, as somebody who has witnessed the growth of the Greenville theater community firsthand, both as an actor and now as a director, I was going to ask you what you think is unique and special about Greenville's theater community in general.
That's a great question. I mean, I think for a town this size to have as many theatrical performance opportunities, it's kind of remarkable. I mean, just in the downtown quadrant alone, you have Greenville Theater, Warehouse, Center Stage, and us here at SCCT, and that's not counting the ones that are only a stone's throw away, like Milltown, which is in Pelzer and Simpsonville, and Malden, and Spartanburg Little Theater, and the list just sort of goes on and on from there. I think what's the interesting thing about doing theater in a place like Greenville is that you don't have a ton of career performers, right? That's not how hardly anybody makes a living in this town is through performing. And so you're working with people who are, in real estate or in banking or in the hospital system or whatever. And so, it sort of has that fun element of community theater about it, in that you're bringing together disparate members of a community to tell a story. But because this town is supportive of its artists and this town is supportive of theater, there is the financial means to then take all that and produce very professionally, which is, I think, something you don't always get. A lot of places, if it's community theater, it's all volunteer actors and you're all throwing it together, last minute or not necessarily last minute, but on very minimal budget. And we are fortunate in this town and here at SCCT in many ways to have, essentially volunteer actors. We do pay our adult performers, but it's not enough to make a living on. But you have that, but you also have the production quality that you feel like, oh, this feels as if it is something polished and produced and professional. And I think that's a unique thing. And I also think it's unique this city is deeply supportive of the performing arts, of the arts in general. And that goes back, there's a history in this town of that. There's a history of philanthropy in this town for the arts. And I think it is one of the things that makes Greenville such a destination. We don't always talk about it that way. We talk a lot about the food. We talk a lot about the climate. We talk a lot about the beautiful natural resources that surround us. But one of the reasons people like coming to Greenville is because there is always something to do, whether it's the symphony or theater or an art exhibit or anything. And it makes this town culturally vibrant as well as economically vibrant as well.
Yeah, and I wanted to speak to what you were saying about the actors not being career actors or anything, because I totally agree with that. That's part of the reason why I loved when I was in Furman, I was in Pauper Players, which was the student-run musical theater organization. None of us were theater majors because we were all doing different things. But the thing that I thought made that so special, and I think also makes Greenville's theater scene and SCCT so special, is that, of course, we're not career actors, but these are people who still want to carve time out of their lives to pay into their passion, I think.
Right.
Which I think is its own special kind of love for theater. It kind of, like when I watch the movie Soul, it kind of reminds me of that,
sure.
Where it's like, just because it's your passion doesn't mean you have to do it, but it doesn't mean it has to leave your life either. And I think that brings, like, I do think that there's a different kind of love for theater that people who don't do it as a career have for it that you can see in a different way when you watch shows in Greenville.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, if you do it for a career, it is a job, and everybody can tell. You can say, well, isn't it fun? Like my mother was a school teacher, and it takes a deep sense of passion and purpose and commitment to be a public school teacher. But we all recognize, maybe you love it, maybe you have a passion for it, but it is a hard job. It is difficult and grinding and all those sorts of things. And the same is true of people who perform or direct or design for theater professionally. It's a job. And, yes, we all talk a lot about, you must feel so blessed and so fortunate to get to do it. Absolutely. But it does take a toll on you in a different way than it does elsewhere. If you're doing it primarily for fun or primarily for community or if it's not your primary way of making a living. Because, actors in Seattle or Minneapolis or New York or Chicago, it's hard work.
Mm-hmm.
Performing six nights a week, doing the toll it takes on your body, never knowing where the next role is going to come from, the next paycheck, all those sorts of things. So while they are brilliant and wonderful performers, you're absolutely right. There's something fresh and energetic that someone who isn't reliant upon theater can kind of bring to a role, because they don't have the psychological demands associated with performing that someone who is trying to do it professionally may have.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So on that vein, in terms of things that you're excited about right now, what are some of the things that you're seeing either at SCCT or in Greenville in general that are exciting to you, something that's fresh, something that you kind of want to plug, I guess?
No, yes. No, I think, we have seen over the past, especially coming out of the pandemic here at SCCT, we have seen a real desire to come back to the theater, which has been very helpful for us. It's also, I think, helpful to have this beautiful new space right in the West End, right? That helps a great deal as well. It's a place people want to come to. Mm-hmm. But our classes have continued to hit sort of record enrollment numbers, which is fantastic news. And we keep our shows have been selling very well, which is exciting. And I think that gives us a little bit of energy and desire to keep doing new things and exciting things. We're in this currently in this production of directing this. I'm currently directing this production of Cinderella, which you happen to be in.
I sure am, as tall girl.
Worst decision of my life was casting you. No, but it's the classic Rodgers and Hammerstein musical. We're taking a really sort of fun and funky and fresh design approach to it. The story is the same, the songs are the same, but the way the show will look on stage is going to be different, and that's something we now feel like we have the flexibility to do. And later our next show right after that is a show called The Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane, which is based off a beautiful book by Kate DiCamillo, which is there's sort of a really it's a unique and beautiful way of storytelling that we haven't always gotten to produce here at SCCT, and it's going to be fantastic. And it's a show I am personally one of the shows I'm most excited for in the season, even though I'm not directing.
Oh no, that's totally fine. I mean, Cinderella's not that good, I guess.
Yeah, it's gonna be fine. It's a big musical. And then and then at the end of the season, we're wrapping up with Once on This Island, which is this a story told almost exclusively by performers of color. Set in the Caribbean, and with music that has really never been on our stage before, never been on a lot of stages in the upstate before. When we're the first theater that I know of around that is producing the full version, that's the full 2-act adult musical version of Once on This Island, and it's just some brilliant and beautiful storytelling. And these are all sort of programmatic risks in some ways, a fresh approach on Cinderella, the story of Edward Tulane, and then Once on This Island, that we have been in some not always able to take those sorts of risks before, partly because we were spending so much money at the Peace Center to rent space as opposed to having our own space, and a whole host of other reasons. But I'm really excited about the sort of artistic trajectory that this organization is on, and the new paths we're being able to forge. Here in this season, and hopefully in future seasons as well.
Well, and that's part of the reason why I love SCCT so much, is because you guys seem to be doing a lot of really modern takes on things, and I particularly love your commitment to diversity that I'm seeing a lot, which is really refreshing. Not to say that there aren't other theaters that are wanting to do that or anything, but it seems like you guys are really committed to the full send, right into it. When a lot of people, I think. I mean, I remember when you announced Once on This Island, there were several conversations had amongst me and my friends where they would go, do we have the acting base for that?
Yeah.
And we had a conversation about that where you said, if you're not, it's like a never-ending cycle unless you try. And I think that that's something that'll, it's easy to get caught up in, especially in a southern state. I think it's easy to get caught up in, well, we just don't know if we have the diversity for it, because that's just all we've ever known. I like that you guys are taking steps into, I think, the future and the right path of trying to provide theater for everybody and be more diverse with your choices.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I think if you only sort of ever program for material that a certain type of audience and a certain type of performer is going to enjoy, then you're not going to know what other types of performers are out there, right? Mm-hmm. And that's not just. I'm not strictly. Yes, absolutely. It's a conversation about race. It's also a conversation about style of performance and style of music. It's a conversation about sort of a modern versus class. There's a whole host, and when there's a whole host. Diversity and equity and inclusion covers so many different bases, and I think you're right. I mean, we can sit here and say, well, we can't do that show because we don't have the actors. Well, then you're never going to have the actors, and you're never going to have the audience, or we don't have the audience. That's the biggest one, I think, in the theater, is we say, well, we don't have the audience for that. Well, you're never going to build a new audience if you only do the same things you've always done for 50 years, right? I mean, the way you build new audience, the way you invite and welcome new people who maybe don't go to the theater regularly into the space, is you do work that excites them. You do work that motivates them to want to come, and the goal, the dream, right, is that once they come and they see something that excites them, that energizes them, that moves them, they're like, great, well, I want to come back and see more. Even if it's not the same story, I want to come back and see more. I want to see more of those sorts of things. And we are fortunate right now at SCCT to be willing and being able to take some of those choices, make some of those choices, and take some of those sort of artistic risks.
Yeah, well, and some of my friends too who are not white have expressed to me how they're so thankful that now they're having grown up in the theater in the upstate, they're starting to see diversity, and they recalled stories to me where they were like, I knew I was going to get cast to that role because I'm not white. Yeah. And so seeing them kind of find that relief is from,
Yeah.
I mean, you know, from a secondary standpoint, I'm like, secondary empathy, I'm happy that
Yeah.
that's not a thought that's constantly on their mind anymore, that, well, I'm not going to get cast as a main role because I don't look the part.
Right.
I appreciate that.
And that's, you know, it's because it's twofold, right? It's if you're trying to grow an audience, it's trying to, stories like Sound of Music or Cinderella or whatever, it's saying, hey, these stories belong to all of us. They don't have to be cast with the same people. You can cast any role however way, you know, in 12 different ways. So it's doing that, right? It's reclaiming some of these older classical musicals or classic pieces of play, right? And saying let's break down some sort of casting barriers that we have unnecessarily erected over the past few years. And on top of that, it's also programming work that comes from a different perspective, right? And that's what sort of Once on This Island is a great example. You know, Cinderella is an example because we have a diverse cast and people of color in certain roles that maybe in the past they wouldn't have been able to play. But at the same, but that's a story that is most familiar to a certain type of audience. And then the other side of that, though, is Once on This Island, which is a story about a perspective from a protagonist that is not that's not a white protagonist, for example, right? And so it's doing both. It's saying let's reimagine how we cast other the shows we've always done, but also let's tell some different stories, because both things are vital and important to continuing to grow and enhance the theatrical product.
Yeah. I really wasn't meaning to go that deep,
sorry.
but no. I'm glad that I'm glad that it came out. I think it's important to talk about. But okay, so doing a complete 180 into something that's really digestible. Kind of my final question is, I ask it to every guest that we have. It doesn't have to be related to anything that your career or anything, but it can be. What is your favorite thing about living or working, whatever you want, in Greenville?
Oh, my favorite. I mean, I think that you can always get a parking space. I mean, that's
that's a joke for anyone who's not from here.
Well, that is pretty true. You can always get it, like even if it's in a garage. I mean, I think that's. I mean, what I mean by that.
Tell that to us who are parking in the fire zone at rehearsals.
Well,
though.
I'm not talking about here. The theater. I'm talking about. No, I mean more like. I say that. Jokingly, but I mean it in the sense that what Greenville has to me is so many amenities of a larger market, but still has the accessibility of the smaller market in some ways. You know, I mean, I say this all the time, but like the fact that you can come downtown on the weekend and park at Richardson Parking Garage for $0, no big city is going to ever let you do that. That's when you're going to be paying $25 to park downtown, right? And it's not just about parking. I just mean like the fact that
I know what you mean.
Can wander. There's so many great the city is just so accessible. You can wander in places. You can go to always find a new restaurant. Always find a new activity that's taking place, and you can do so surrounded by. I was driving to the theater yesterday, and I was driving some back roads because I was coming from my parents' house, and I was just struck by how gorgeous it is down here, how beautiful the weather is most of the time when it's not July and some parts of August. So that's what I would say. I think I love the accessibility of Greenville, but there's still so many. You went to Furman, right? It's like when I went to Wofford.
The better school.
No, the slightly subpar school. But when I went to Wofford, one of the things our president at the time would say is, you have all the amenities of like a Clemson. You just don't have to stand in line to use them, right?
Yes.
And that's why you and I chose Furman, and I chose Furman and Wofford. They're smaller schools. That's what Greenville is to me. You have in many ways, you have so many amenities of a big city where so much is happening, but it's just much more accessible and
it's not oversaturated
yet.
It's
not oversaturated yet. We'll see. But
yeah. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you talking to us.
Of course.
Can you tell us where people can find you on social media, your website, etc.?
Yeah, you can go. Our website is scchildrenstheater.org. Theater is spelled with an R-E on the end, THEATRE. scchildrenstheater.org. We're on Instagram. That's where we're most our social media that's most active. We're also, you can like us and follow us on Facebook as well. And the easiest way to find out all of our information is to sign up for our email e-blast. We just, for example, this year we've just started doing Pay What You Can performances. One performance for each of our big shows is a Pay What You Can. You can pay as little as $1 to come see the show, but we only announce those, or we first announced those via email. We sent that e-blast out this morning, for example, about Cinderella. So about the Pay What You Can performance for Cinderella. So that's the easiest way is to sign up for our emails, follow us on Instagram and Facebook, and you'll hear all of the great things that we're doing.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Okay, awesome. Well, if you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out to me at Katherine@DeLilelink.com or check them out on social media. And until next time, see you later.